Greetings, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Chilliteracy. My god, the alerts are all going off. So many resubscriptions. Woo! Happy Wednesday, everybody. And welcome back after a week off. Sam and I have had a week off, and hopefully that means you have all caught up on various streams. Not that there's much to catch up on anymore, because we have finished Pride and Prejudice, which I finished last week. Not last week, the week before. And so, yeah. The next one, I believe, possibly, will be Sam beginning Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. But yes, hello. Hello, everybody. How are we all doing? Hope you got some time to relax in your time off. Yeah, we did. We had a nice week. The weather was warmer than anticipated, and I got sunburnt. But other than that, all good. But yes, hello, everybody. How are we all doing? I hope we are all well. Oh, excuse me, yawning already. Well, traditions and all that. Yeah, we've got everybody in. We've got Lady Mephistopheles, we've got Ariane, we've got Speedy, Andy Pants, we've got Yoru, we've got Hellmanson, we've got Parola. I think that's everybody. We've got me, probably Sam lurking away somewhere. Although I think he's currently making a coffee, because 9 o'clock in the evening, definitely a good time for a coffee. Doing pretty good? Good. Been going down a rabbit hole of watching Ren reactions, which is fun and emotional. Nice. Oh, hi Lynn. You're hiding in the corner, but you're invisible. Lurk away, my friend. You gotta... Sorry, I'm doing the thing of reading words and trying to say them at the same time. Whilst I'm trying to speak something completely different. You got a mosquito bite the size of a chicken egg on your leg. Oh, that sounds unpleasant. That sounds very unpleasant. I am sorry to hear that. Yeah, ow indeed. I hope that goes away somehow. But, yeah, that's not fun. But yeah, I hope everybody else has had a decent week. Whether you've had a week off or not, you probably haven't, but I hope it's been nice. I hope you've had decent weather. We have had weather. Sometimes been nice, sometimes been too hot, sometimes been raining. The usual. But yeah. Trying to decide what chill game to play while listening. Ooh. Do I have any recommendations? Can't think of any off the top of my head. Sam and I have been... Well, Sam's been playing and I've been attempting to help him with puzzles. Doing Animal Well. If anybody here has played Animal Well. It is... kind of... It scratches the sort of Fez / Tunic itch. Which is great because... always up for more games like Fez and Tunic. But yeah, I think Sam said that somewhere, or maybe on the Steam page or something, it says like puzzles that will keep people going for years, which is quite a claim. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. We definitely haven't finished the game, so that's kind of currently what we've been doing. Good times anniversary. Hi Ray Tracer, how are you? Hope you are well. But yeah, tonight I thought, because we were sort of... I mean, I didn't do a lot of reading in June, which was of course Pride Month. And frankly, just give me an excuse to stop reading Katherine Mansfield, because I can't find a good one, because she's great and I love her. She's fantastic. So tonight I thought we'd read some more Katherine Mansfield. Hooray! Because, as I say, she's fantastic. So I've got a couple of stories for you tonight. Hopefully they'll be around about the right length. Again, this is the problem of doing a long book, a long novel. I forget sort of my timings for short stories, and like how many I can fit into one stream. So hopefully they'll be all right. You finished your biggest current crochet... That's a really difficult sentence to say. You finished your biggest current crochet project the other day, and now you're almost done with the second biggest one. Ooh. Soon you're going to have to decide what to do next. Oh, that's the difficult thing. Ray Tracer, you've done a sub. Thank you very much. Yay to more Katherine Mansfield. Indeed. She is wonderful. So, yeah, I mean, do we have any other things that I wanted to say? I read Annihilation. So, Rimbo, is she gay? I mean, yes. But also, it wasn't some... I don't think she was very open about it. I'm not sure. I have looked at her Wikipedia. But yeah, she is what I like to term a bicon. Because I think she was bi. From at least from sort of reading her writing. But yes, there's a lot of sort of very gay undertones and repression in her works it's again, it's good to read because it's like, yes, let's get that representation in. But also like she was writing in a time where you didn't even put this in subtext. And she very much did. Happy Subs Day to you, Sam. Indeed, happy Subs Day. So yes, we like Katherine Mansfield. She's fab. And also just generally sort of writing about sort of women's experiences and stuff. And also I love her writing style. It's just really nice, really lovely. Very descriptive. So yeah. I'm getting on. Excuse me. Ooh. Oh yes, I finished. So Sam and I decided that we would spend sort of an afternoon sitting outside when it was nice weather. We got the giant beanbag out and sat outside and read. I didn't bring a book with me, so Sam lent me one of his. He lent me Annihilation, as in the one the film's based on. And I finished it in about, I don't know how long, maybe 3 hours, 2 hours? Sam probably has a better idea. But it was really good. I really enjoyed it. It was great. This is 2 to 3 hours, yeah. This is the giant beanbag. Yeah, it's great. You have to, if there's two people on it, you have to sit down at the same time though, or one person sort of gets sort of on the floor and the other person is sort of in the sky. Especially if one of you is significantly larger than the other person. It's yeah. I can sort of, yeah. If Sam sits down before me, I'm sort of up in the air somewhere. You wish to own a giant beanbag? I don't think this one was particularly expensive. Sam will know. Sam bought it. It's like an outdoor beanbag, and it's very handy. We have used it like for the last couple of summers, 3 summers. I can't remember when he bought it. But yes, so it wasn't super costly. No, I didn't think it was. Nice. But yeah, so I read a book. This is the problem. I get given a book, I enjoy said book, it's finished in about, 2 to 3 hours. Oh well. You've had it 3 years now, God. Yeah, probably. How time flies. But yes, if we're all sitting comfortably, I think we shall begin. So the first story we've got today is you did lend me the other 2. Yes, in the Southern Reach trilogy. Yes, which I haven't started yet. But I'm sure over the next couple of days, if I start them, I'll let you know how they are. I'll finish them. It is very funny to me, the response I get from people, but specifically Sam, when people realise how fast I read in the wild kind of thing. It's just like, wait, you finished it? Yes. Did you actually read it or did you skim it? No, I read it. It was great. I will go back in a book and remember specific bits and go, I liked this bit. Yeah. When you read that fast, every bookshop is a library. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I have gone into like a Waterstones several times and got halfway through a book before I've realised, oh, I shouldn't do that. Yeah, I don't think you're meant to do that. But hey ho. But yes, we've got a couple of stories tonight. The first one is I've linked it up there in chat. It's called The Little Governess, and I don't think it needs any kind of it doesn't really need any kind of content warning, but for anybody who is, I guess anybody who's not male, and quite frankly everybody will have had these kinds of experiences, but this is very much a women's experience and like non-guy experience of someone travelling in a foreign country on their own. And honestly, me reading it, I was feeling a little bit uncomfortable because I know this feeling, and I know the kind of, frankly, fear. So just as a little warning there, I mean, there's nothing like, it's not like content warning really, but it's just very well written, well put together, and kind of, it obviously makes you empathize, but also like puts you in the shoes of this feels very familiar. Mood warning, I guess. Yes, like slightly scary, I guess, but in a very not scary enough. We need like a different word for that. There will be a different word. Perturbing. No, that's not really the right word. Anyway, if we're all sitting comfortably and have some kind of, beverage or something, we shall begin tonight's stream with The Little Governess by Katherine Mansfield. Oh dear, how she wished that it wasn't night time. She'd have much rather travelled by day, much, much rather. But the lady at the governess bureau had said, "You had better take an evening boat, and then if you get into a compartment for ladies only in the train, you will be far safer than sleeping in a foreign hotel. Don't go out of the carriage, don't walk about the corridors, and be sure to lock the lavatory door if you go there. The train arrives at Munich at 8 o'clock, and Frau Arnhold says that the Hotel Grunewald is only 1 minute away. A porter can take you there. She will arrive at 6 the same evening, so you will have a nice quiet day to rest after the journey and rub up on your German. And when you want anything to eat, I would advise you to pop into the nearest baker's and get a bun and some coffee. You haven't been abroad before, have you?" "No." "Well, I always tell my girls that it's better to mistrust people at first rather than trust them, and it's safer to suspect people of evil intentions rather than good ones. It sounds rather hard, but we've got to be women of the world, haven't we?" It had been nice in the ladies' cabin. The stewardess was so kind and changed her money for her and tucked up her feet. She lay on one of the hard, pink-sprigged couches and watched the other passengers, friendly and natural, pinning their hats to the bolsters, taking off their boots and skirts, opening dressing cases and arranging mysterious, rustling little packages, tying their heads up in veils before lying down. Thud, thud, thud went the steady screw of the steamer. The stewardess pulled a green shade over the light and sat down by the stove, her skirt turned back over her knees, a long piece of knitting on her lap. On a shelf above her head there was a water bottle with a tight bunch of flowers stuck in it. "I like travelling very much," thought the little governess. She smiled and yielded to the warm rocking. But when the boat stopped and she went up on deck, her dress basket in one hand, her rug and umbrella in the other, a cold, strange wind flew under her hat. She looked up at the masts and spars of the ship, black against a green glittering sky, and down to the dark landing stage where strange muffled figures lounged, waiting. She moved forward with the sleepy flock, all knowing where to go and what to do except her, and she felt afraid. Just a little, just enough to wish that it was daytime and that one of those women who had smiled at her in the glass when they both did their hair in the ladies' cabin was somewhere near now. "Tickets, please. Show your tickets. Have your tickets ready." She went down the gangway, balancing herself carefully on her heels. Then a man in a black leather cap came forward and touched her on the arm. "Where for, miss?" He spoke English. He must be a guard or a station master with a cap like that. She had scarcely answered when he pounced on her dress basket. "This way," he shouted in a rude, determined voice, and elbowing his way, he strode past the people. But I don't want a porter. What a horrible man. I don't want a porter, I want to carry it myself. She had to run to keep up with him, and her anger, far stronger than she, ran before her and snatched the bag out of the wretch's hand. He paid no attention at all, but swung on down the long, dark platform and across a railway line. He is a robber. She was sure he was a robber as she stepped between the silvery rails and felt the cinders crunch under her shoes. On the other side, oh, thank goodness, there was a train with Munich written on it. The man stopped by the huge lighted carriages. "Second class?" asked the insolent voice. "Yes, a ladies' compartment." She was quite out of breath. She opened her little purse to find something small enough to give this horrible man, while he tossed her dress basket into the rack of an empty carriage that had a ticket, Dame Seule, gummed on the window. She got into the train and handed him 20 centimes. "What's this?" shouted the man, glaring at the money and then at her, holding it up to his nose, sniffing it as though he had never in his life seen, much less held, such a sum. "It's a franc. You know that, don't you? It's a franc, that's my fare." A franc? Did he imagine that she was going to give him a franc for playing a trick like that, just because she was a girl and travelling alone at night? Never, never! She squeezed her purse in her hand and simply did not see him. She looked at a view of St. Malo on the wall opposite and simply did not hear him. No. 4 sous. You make a mistake. Here, take it. It's a franc I want." He leapt onto the step of the train and threw the money onto her lap. Trembling with terror, she screwed herself tight, and put out an icy hand and took the money, stowed it away in her hand. "That's all you're going to get," she said. For a minute or two she felt his sharp eyes pricking her all over, while he nodded slowly, pulling down his mouth. "Very well. Très bien." He shrugged his shoulders and disappeared into the dark. Oh, the relief! How simply terrible that had been! As she stood up to feel if the dress basket was firm, she caught sight of herself in the mirror, quite white, with big round eyes. She untied her motor veil and unbuttoned her green cape. "But it's all over now," she said to the mirror face, feeling in some way that it was more frightened than she. People began to assemble on the platform. They stood together in little groups, talking. A strange light from the station lamps painted their faces almost green. A little boy in red clattered up with a huge tea wagon and leaned against it, whistling and flicking his boots with a serviette. A woman in a black alpaca apron pushed a barrow with pillows for hire. Dreamy and vacant she looked, like a woman wheeling a perambulator, up and down, with a sleeping baby inside it. Wreaths of white smoke floated up from somewhere and hung below the roof like misty vines. "How strange it all is," thought the little governess, "and the middle of the night, too." She looked out from her safe corner, frightened no longer, but proud that she had not given that franc. "I can look after myself, of course I can. The great thing is not to—" Suddenly from the corridor there came a stamping of feet and men's voices, high and broken with snatches of loud laughter. They were coming her way. The little governess shrank into her corner as 4 young men in bowler hats passed, staring through the door and window. One of them, bursting with the joke, pointed to the notice Dame Seule, and the 4 bent down the better to see the one little girl in the corner. Oh dear, they were in the carriage next door. She heard them tramping about, and then a sudden hush, followed by a tall, thin fellow with a tiny black moustache, who flung her door open. "If mademoiselle cares to come in with us," he said in French. She saw the others crowding behind him, peeping under his arm and over his shoulder, and she sat very straight and still. "If Mademoiselle will do us the honour," mocked the tall man. One of them could be quiet no longer. His laughter went off in a loud crack. "Mademoiselle is serious," persisted the young man, bowing and grimacing. He took off his hat with a flourish, and she was alone again. "En voiture! En voiture!" Someone ran up and down beside the train. "I wish it wasn't night time. I wish there was another woman in the carriage. I'm frightened of the men next door." The little governess looked out to see her porter coming back again, the same man making for her carriage with his arms full of luggage. But what was he doing? He put his thumbnail under the label Dame Seule and tore it right off, and then stood aside squinting at her while an old man wrapped in a plaid cape climbed up the high step. "But this is a ladies' compartment." "Oh no, mademoiselle, you make a mistake." No, I assure you. Merci, monsieur. En voiture!" A shrill whistle. The porter stepped off triumphant, and the train started. For a moment or two, big tears brimmed her eyes, and through them she saw the old man unwinding a scarf from his neck and untying the flaps of his Jaeger cap. He looked very old, 90 at least. He had a white moustache and big gold-rimmed spectacles with little blue eyes behind them and pink wrinkled cheeks. A nice face, and charming the way he bent forward and said in halting French, "Do I disturb you, mademoiselle? Would you rather I took all these things out of the rack and found another carriage?" "What? That old man have to move all those heavy things just because she—" "No, it's quite all right. You don't disturb me at all." "Ah, 1,000 thanks." He sat down opposite her and unbuttoned the cape of his enormous coat and flung it off his shoulders. The train seemed glad to have left the station. With a long leap it sprang into the dark. She rubbed a place in the window with her glove, but she could see nothing, just a tree outspread like a black fan, or a scatter of lights, or the line of a hill, solemn and huge. In the carriage next door, the young men started singing Un, deux, trois. They sang the same song over and over at the tops of their voices. "I never could have dared to go to sleep if I had been alone," she decided. "I couldn't have put my feet up or even taken off my hat." The singing gave her a queer little tremble in her stomach, and, hugging herself to stop it, with her arms crossed under her cape, she felt really glad to have the old man in the carriage with her. Careful to see that he was not looking, she peeped at him through her long lashes. He sat extremely upright, the chest thrown out, the chin well in, knees pressed together, reading a German paper. That was why he spoke French so funnily. He was a German. Something in the army, she supposed, a colonel or a general. Once, of course, not now. He was too old for that now. How spick and span he looked for an old man. He wore a pearl pin stuck in his black tie, and a ring with a dark red stone on his little finger. The tip of a white silk handkerchief showed in the pocket of his double-breasted jacket. Somehow, altogether, he was really nice to look at. Most old men were so horrid. She couldn't bear them doddery, or they had a disgusting cough or something. But not having a beard, that made all the difference. And then his cheeks were so pink and his moustache so very white. Down went the German paper, and the old man leaned forward with the same delightful courtesy. "Do you speak German, mademoiselle?" "Ja, ein wenig, mehr als Französisch," said the little governess, blushing a deep pink colour that spread slowly over her cheeks and made her blue eyes look almost black. "Ach, so." The old man bowed graciously. "Then perhaps you would care to look at some illustrated papers." He slipped a rubber band from a little roll of them and handed them across. "Thank you very much." She was very fond of looking at pictures, but first she would take off her hat and gloves. So she stood up, unpinned the brown straw and put it neatly in the rack beside the dress basket, stripped off her brown kid gloves, paired them in a tight roll and put them in the crown of the hat for safety, and then sat down again, more comfortably this time, her feet crossed, the papers on her lap. How kindly the old man in the corner watched her bare little hand turning over the big white pages, watched her lips moving as she pronounced the long words to herself, rested upon her hair that fairly blazed under the light. Alas, how tragic for a little governess to possess hair that made one think of tangerines and marigolds, of apricots and tortoiseshell cats and champagne. Perhaps that was what the old man was thinking as he gazed and gazed, and that not even the dark, ugly clothes could disguise her soft beauty. Perhaps the flush that licked his cheeks and lips was a flush of rage that anyone so young and tender should have to travel alone and unprotected through the night. Who knows, he was not murmuring in his sentimental German fashion, "Ja, es ist eine Tragödie. Would to God I were the child's grandpapa." "Thank you very much. They were very interesting." She smiled prettily, handing back the papers. "But you speak German extremely well," said the old man. "You have been in Germany before, of course?" "Oh, no, this is the first time." A little pause, then, "This is the first time that I have ever been abroad at all." "Really? I am surprised. You gave me the impression, if I may say so, that you were accustomed to travelling." "Oh, well, I have been about a good deal in England, and to Scotland once." "So, I myself have been in England once, but I could not learn English." He raised one hand and shook his head, laughing. "No, it was too difficult for me. How do you do? Please, which is the way to Leicester Square?" She laughed too. Foreigners always say... They had quite a little talk about it. "But you will like Munich," said the old man. "Munich is a wonderful city. Museums, pictures, galleries, fine buildings and shops, concerts, theatres, restaurants, all are in Munich. I have travelled all over Europe many, many times in my life, but it is always to Munich that I return. You will enjoy yourself there." "I am not going to stay in Munich," said the little governess, and she added shyly, "I am going to a post as governess to a doctor's family in Augsburg." Ah, that was it. Augsburg he knew. Augsburg, well, was not beautiful. A solid manufacturing town. But if Germany was new to her, he hoped she would find something interesting there too. "I'm sure I shall. But what a pity not to see Munich before you go. You ought to take a little holiday on your way," he smiled, "and store up some pleasant memories." "I am afraid I could not do that," said the little governess, shaking her head, suddenly important and serious. "And also, if one is alone—" He quite understood. He bowed, serious too. They were silent after that. The train shattered on, bearing its dark, flaming breast to the hills and to the valleys. It was warm in the carriage. She seemed to lean against the dark rushing and to be carried away and away. Little sounds made themselves heard, steps in the corridor, doors opening and shutting, a murmur of voices, whistling. Then the window was pricked with long needles of rain. But it did not matter. It was outside, and she had her umbrella. She pouted, sighed, opened and shut her hands once, and fell fast asleep. "Pardon, pardon!" The sliding back of the carriage door woke her with a start. What had happened? Someone had come in and gone out again. The old man sat in his corner, more upright than ever, his hands in the pockets of his coat, frowning heavily. "Ha ha ha!" came from the carriage next door. Still half asleep, she put her hands to her hair to make sure it wasn't a dream. "Disgraceful," muttered the old man, more to himself than to her. "Common vulgar fellows. I am afraid they disturbed you, gracious Fraulein, blundering in here like that." "No, not really. She was just going to wake up, and she took out her silver watch to look at the time. 4:30. A cold blue light filled the window panes. Now, when she rubbed a place, she could see bright patches of fields, a clump of white houses like mushrooms, a road like a picture with poplar trees on either side, a thread of river. How pretty it was! How pretty and how different! Even those pink clouds in the sky looked foreign. It was cold, but she pretended that it was far colder and rubbed her hands together and shivered, pulling at the collar of her coat because she was so happy. The train began to slow down. The engine gave a long, shrill whistle. They were coming to a town. Taller houses, pink and yellow, glided by, fast asleep behind their green eyelids and guarded by the poplar trees that quivered in the blue air as if on tiptoe, listening. In one house a woman opened the shutters, flung a red and white mattress across the window frame and stood staring at the train. A pale woman with black hair and a white woolen shawl over her shoulders. More women appeared at the doors and at the windows of the sleeping houses. There came a flock of sheep. The shepherd wore a blue blouse and pointed wooden shoes. Look! Look what flowers! And by the railway station too. Standard roses like bridesmaids' bouquets, white geraniums, waxy pink ones that you would never see out of a greenhouse at home. Slower and slower. A man with a watering can was spraying the platform. "Ah!" Somebody came running and waving his arms. A huge fat woman waddled through the glass doors of the station with a tray of strawberries. Oh, she was thirsty. She was very thirsty. "Ah!" The same somebody ran back again. The train stopped. The old man pulled his coat round him and got up, smiling at her. He murmured something she didn't quite catch, but she smiled back at him as he left the carriage. While he was away, the little governess looked at herself again in the glass, shook and patted herself with the precise practical care of a girl who is old enough to travel by herself and has nobody else to assure her that she is quite all right behind. Thirsty, thirsty. The air tasted of water. She let down the window, and the fat woman with the strawberries passed as if on purpose, holding up the tray to her. "Nein, danke," said the little governess, looking at the big berries on their gleaming leaves. "Wie viel?" she asked as the fat woman moved away. 2 Marks 50, Fraulein." Good gracious! She came in from the window and sat down in the corner, very sobered for a minute. 1/2 a crown! "Ooh-ee!" shrieked the train, gathering itself together to be off again. She hoped the old man wouldn't be left behind. Oh, it was daylight. Everything was lovely, if only she hadn't been so thirsty. Where was the old man? Oh, here he was. She dimpled at him as though he were an old accepted friend as he closed the door and, turning, took from under his cape a basket of the strawberries. If Fraulein would honour me by accepting these. What, for me? But she drew back and raised her hands as though he were about to put a wild little kitten on her lap. "Certainly, for you," said the old man. "For myself it is 20 years since I was brave enough to eat strawberries." "Oh, thank you very much. Danke bestens," she stammered. "Sie sind so sehr schön." "Eat them and see," said the old man, looking pleased and friendly. You won't even have one?" "No, no, no." Timidly and charmingly her hand hovered. They were so big and juicy, she had to take 2 bites to them. The juice ran all down her fingers, and it was while she munched the berries that she first thought of the old man as a grandfather. What a perfect grandfather he would make, just like one out of a book. The sun came out, the pink clouds in the sky. The strawberry clouds were eaten by the blue. "Are they good?" asked the old man. "As good as they look?" When she had eaten them, she felt she had known him for years. She told him about Frau Arnholt and how she had got the place. Did he know the Hotel Grunwald? Frau Arnholt would not arrive until the evening. He listened until he knew as much about the affair as she did, until he said, not looking at her, but smoothing the palms of his brown suede gloves together, "I wonder if you would let me show you a little of Munich today. Nothing much, but just perhaps a picture gallery and the Englischer Garten. It seems such a pity that you should have to spend the day at the hotel, and also a little uncomfortable in a strange place. Nicht wahr? You would be back there by the early afternoon or whenever you wish, of course, and you would give an old man a great deal of pleasure." It was not until long after she had said yes, because the moment she had said it he had thanked her, he began telling her about his travels in Turkey and Attar of Roses, that she wondered whether she had done wrong. After all, she really did not know him. But he was so old, and he had been so very kind, not to mention the strawberries, and she couldn't have explained the reason why she said no. And it was her last day, in a way, her last day to really enjoy herself in. Was I wrong? Was I? A drop of sunlight fell into her hands and lay there, warm and quivering. "If I might accompany you as far as the hotel," he suggested, "and call for you again at about 10 o'clock. He took out his pocket-book and handed her a card. Herr Regierungsrat. He had a title. Well, it was bound to be all right. So after that, the little governess gave herself up to the excitement of being really abroad, to looking out and reading the foreign advertisement signs, and being told about the places they came to, having her attention and enjoyment looked after by the charming old grandfather, until they reached Munich and the Hauptbahnhof. "Porter! Porter!" He found her a porter, disposed of his own luggage in a few words, guided her through the bewildering crowd out of the station, down the clean white steps, into the white road to the hotel. He explained who she was to the manager, as though this had all been bound to happen, and then for one moment her little hand lost itself in the big brown suede ones. "I will call for you at 10 o'clock. He was gone. "This way, Fraulein," said a waiter, who had been dodging behind the manager's back, all eyes and ears for the strange couple. She followed him up 2 flights of stairs into a dark bedroom. He dashed down her dress basket and pulled up a clattering, dusty blind. Ugh, what an ugly, cold room. What enormous furniture. Fancy spending the day in here. "Is this the room Frau Arnholt ordered?" asked the little governess. The waiter had a curious way of staring as if there was something funny about her. He pursed up his lips, about to whistle, and then changed his mind. "Gewiss," he said. Well, why didn't he go? Why did he stare so? "Gehen Sie," said the little governess, with frigid English simplicity. His little eyes, like currants, nearly popped out of his doughy cheeks. "Gehen Sie sofort," she repeated icily. At the door he turned. "And the gentleman?" said he. "Shall I show the gentleman upstairs when he comes?" Over the white streets, big white clouds fringed with silver, and sunshine everywhere. Fat coachmen driving fat cabs, funny women with little round hats cleaning the tramway lines, people laughing and pushing against one another, trees on both sides of the streets, and everywhere you looked almost immense fountains, a noise of laughing from the footpaths or in the middle of the streets or the open windows. And beside her, more beautifully brushed than ever, with a rolled umbrella in one hand and yellow gloves instead of brown ones, her grandfather, who had asked her to spend the day. She wanted to run. She wanted to hang on his arm. She wanted to cry every minute. "Oh, I am so frightfully happy." He guided her across the roads, stood still while she looked, and his kind eyes beamed on her, and he said, "Just whatever you wish." She ate 2 white sausages and 2 little rolls of fresh bread at 11 o'clock in the morning, and she drank some beer, which he told her wasn't intoxicating, wasn't at all like English beer, out of a glass like a flower vase. And then they took a cab, and really she must have seen thousands and thousands of wonderful classical pictures in about a quarter of an hour. I shall have to think them over when I am alone. But when they came out of the picture gallery, it was raining. The grandfather unfurled his umbrella and held it over the little governess. They started to walk to the restaurant for lunch. She, very close beside him so that he should have some of the umbrella too. "It goes easier," he remarked in a detached way, "if you take my arm, Fraulein. And besides, it is the custom in Germany." So she took his arm and walked beside him while he pointed out the famous statues, so interested that he quite forgot to put down the umbrella even when the rain was long over. After lunch they went to a cafe to hear a gypsy band, but she did not like that at all. Ugh, such horrible men were there, with heads like eggs and cuts on their faces. So he turned her chair and cupped her burning cheeks. So she turned her chair and cupped her burning cheeks in her hands and watched her old friend instead. Then they went to the Englischer Garten. "I wonder what the time is?" asked the little governess. "My watch has stopped. I forgot to wind it in the train last night. We've seen such a lot of things that I feel it must be quite late." "Late?" He stopped in front of her, laughing and shaking his head in a way she had begun to know. "Why? Then you have really not really enjoyed yourself. Late? Why, we have not had any ice cream yet." "Oh, but I have enjoyed myself," she cried, distressed. "More than I can possibly say. It has been wonderful. Only Frau Arnhold is to be at the hotel at 6, and I ought to be there by 5. "So you shall. After the ice cream I shall put you into a cab and you can go there comfortably." She was happy again. The chocolate ice cream melted in little sips a long way down. The shadows of the trees danced on the tablecloths, and she sat with her back safely turned to the ornamental clock that pointed to 25 minutes to 7. "Really and truly," said the little governess earnestly, "this has been the happiest day of my life. I've never even imagined such a day." In spite of the ice cream, her grateful baby heart glowed with love for the fairy grandfather. So they walked out of the garden, down a long alley. The day was nearly over. "You see those big buildings opposite?" said the old man. "The 3rd story, that is where I live. I and the old housekeeper who looks after me." She was very interested. "Now, just before I find a cab for you, will you come and see my little home and let me give you a bottle of the attar of roses I told you about in the train, for remembrance?" She would love to. "I've never seen a bachelor's flat in my life," laughed the little governess. The passage was quite dark. "I suppose my old woman has gone out to buy me a chicken. One moment." He opened a door and stood aside for her to pass, a little shy but curious, into a strange room. She did not know quite what to say. It wasn't pretty. In a way it was very ugly, but neat, and, she supposed, comfortable for such an old man. "Well, what do you think of it?" He knelt down and took from a cupboard a round tray with 2 pink glasses and a tall pink bottle. 2 little bedrooms beyond, he said gaily, and a kitchen. It's enough, eh? Oh, quite enough. And if ever you should be in Munich and care to spend a day or two, why, there is always a little nest, a wing of a chicken and a salad, and an old man delighted to be your host once more, and many, many times, dear little Fraulein. He took the stopper out of the bottle and poured some wine into the 2 pink glasses. His hand shook and the wine spilled over the tray. It was very quiet in the room. She said, I think I ought to go now. But you will have a tiny glass of wine with me, just one before you go, said the old man. No, really, no. I never drink wine. I have promised never to touch wine or anything like that. And though he pleaded, and though she felt dreadfully rude, especially when he seemed to take it to heart so, she was quite determined. No, really, please. Well, will you just sit down on the sofa for 5 minutes and let me drink your health? The little governess sat down on the edge of the red velvet couch, and he sat down beside her and drank her health at a gulp. Have you really been happy today? Asked the old man, turning around, so close beside her that she felt his knee twitching against hers. Before she could answer, he held her hands. And are you going to give me one little kiss before you go? He asked, drawing her closer still. It was a dream. It wasn't true. It wasn't the same old man at all. Ah, how horrible! The little governess stared at him in terror. No, 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 she stammered, struggling out of his hands. One little kiss? A kiss? What is it? Just a kiss, dear little Fraulein. A kiss. He pushed his face forward, his lips smiling broadly, and how his little blue eyes gleamed behind the spectacles. Never! Never! How can you? She sprang up, but he was too quick, and he held her against the wall, pressing against her his hard old body and his twitching knee, and though she shook her head from side to side, distracted, kissed her on the mouth. On the mouth! Where not a soul who wasn't a near relation had ever kissed her before. She ran down the street until she found a broad road with tram lines and a policeman standing in the middle like a clockwork doll. I want to get a tram to the Hauptbahnhof, sobbed the little governess. Fraulein? She wrung her hands at him. The Hauptbahnhof. There's one now. And while he watched, very much surprised, the little girl with her hat on one side, crying without a handkerchief, sprang on to the tram, not seeing the conductor's eyebrows, nor hearing the hochwohlgebildete Dame talking her over with a scandalized friend. She rocked herself and cried out loud and said, "Ah! Ah!" pressing her hands to her mouth. She has been to the dentist, shrilled a fat old woman, too stupid to be uncharitable. Na, sagen Sie mal, what toothache! The child hasn't one left in her mouth. While the tram swung and jangled through a world full of old men with twitching knees. When the little governess reached the hall of the Hotel Grunewald, the same waiter who had come into her room in the morning was standing by a table, polishing a tray of glasses. The sight of the little governess seemed to fill him out with some inexplicable, important content. He was ready for her question. His answer came pat and suave. "Yes, Fraulein, the lady has been here. I told her that you had arrived and gone out again immediately with a gentleman. She asked me when you were coming back again, but of course I could not say. And then she went to the manager." He took up a glass from the table, held it up to the light, looked at it with one eye closed, and started polishing it with a corner of his apron. "Pardon, Fraulein?" "Ach, no, Fraulein. The manager could tell her nothing. Nothing." He shook his head and smiled at the brilliant glass. "Where is the lady now?" asked the little governess, shuddering so violently that she had to hold her handkerchief up to her mouth. "How should I know?" cried the waiter, and as he swooped past her to pounce upon a new arrival, his heart beat so hard against his ribs that he nearly chuckled aloud. That's it, he thought. That will show her. And as he swung the new arrival's box onto his shoulders, whoop, as though he were a giant and the box a feather, he minced over again the little governess's words. Gehen Sie sofort. Shall I? He shouted to himself. The end. Yes, I was going to do a content warning for assault, but it kind of ruins the story. Just because it completely spoils it. So, yeah. Don't trust strange men. But it's so sad. Like, she's bless her, she's trying so hard. And yeah, it's kind of to be expected. Yeah, okay, everybody was expecting that to happen. Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, there are things that happen that you're like, okay, it's starting to go downhill here. And just the whole kind of like, yeah, basically it was telegraphed pretty clearly, yeah. And, I mean, she has even, like, it's obvious that she's having second thoughts kind of from the get-go, but against her better judgment, thinks, oh, harmless old man, be fine. So, yeah, that's what I meant about, like, a spoiler is not worth not getting a content warning and being triggered. Yeah, I apologise. Yeah, sorry for that. I should have done that. But, yeah. You were not quite expecting it to be quite as much, but something. Yeah, it was, yeah. Sorry, chat. Yeah, should have done a content warning there, but yeah, sorry. As someone who has also experienced this, like, my personal thing, I was okay reading that, so, but I understand that everybody's got different levels of things, so yeah, should have done a content warning, and I apologise for that, but yeah, I think a lot of people here have probably experienced something very similar. Yeah. The joys. But yeah, so, cheerful little story there. The next one is not that. So, yeah. We all process this stuff differently. We do, yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll stop belaboring the point, but yeah, I was trying to sort of put everything into what I said at the beginning of sort of women's experiences in this kind of situation, sort of being vague but without trying to spoil things, but you know, yeah. Anyway, apologies for that. But yes, I shall throw us all to a break. Don't worry, the next story is, whilst not happy, I'm not sure any of Katherine Mansfield's stories are particularly happy as such, but yeah, it's slightly less disturbing, I guess. But yeah, I will throw you all to a break, go do break-related things, and we shall be back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. return. Welcome back, everybody. Let's get... I hope we've all had a good break and done break-related things. Erin, if you're heading to bed soon, I hope you sleep well. I am going to... Boop. This is a thing. That is the link to the second story we've got. Also, yeah, I'm this digital library thing that I've the text I've linked on has got it's a celebration of women writers. So I want to actually have a look into that and see if they've got any other. I assume they will have have other women writers there. Hopefully, some of whom are out of copyright. I'm kind of curious to see who they've got and what they've got. Whether we can delve into some of that, because that would be good. But yes, I hope you've all had a good break. Let's just doop-a-doop-a-doop. There we go. Right, this one is kind of no like content warnings or anything with this, but it deals with death. It deals with someone dying, and sort of it's kind of just sort of what a family does when like an older person in the family dies, in a kind of sort of sadly banal way. It's nothing like dramatic or anything. It's just sort of, yeah, it's kind of sad. You have strawberries now? Nice. Excellent. But not provided by a creepy old man you don't know. Yes, that's true. That's good. The strawberries in my parents' garden, there were lots of them this year. It's been a very good year for strawberries. My parents saw about 4 of them in terms of to eat. There was a little friend who really liked the strawberries and ate all of the rest of them. And unfortunately it was a cute friend. So my parents didn't have the heart to chase him away. But there was a little fox cub that was eating all of the strawberries, which is adorable. I didn't see it and I was very sad. But yeah, I was fully expecting it to be like slugs or, pigeons or something. But no, it was a baby fox cub, which is adorable. And I hope that fox cub is okay and isn't overly gorged on strawberries. I imagine strawberries are probably fine for foxes. They kind of eat anything. You once saw a fox cub in the garden who walked around eating rose petals? Sure. Gonna have very sweet smelling breath, I'm sure. But yeah, they're basically like the goats of the carnivore world. They'll just eat anything. Actually, no, I suppose those are actually raccoons. They'll eat anything. So are foxes. So are foxes even. Right, I think I should probably get started on the story because I think it's slightly longer than the previous one. So if we're all sitting comfortably, we shall begin our second story for tonight, which is The Daughters of the Late Colonel by Katherine Mansfield. Chapter 1. The week after was one of the busiest weeks of their lives. Even when they went to bed, it was only their bodies that lay down and rested. Their minds went on, thinking things out, talking things over, wondering, deciding, trying to remember where. Constantia lay like a statue, her hands by her sides, her feet just overlapping each other, the sheet up to her chin. She stared at the ceiling. "Do you think Father would mind if we gave his top hat to the porter?" "The porter?" snapped Josephine. "Why ever the porter? What a very extraordinary idea." "Because," said Constantia slowly, "he must often have to go to funerals. And I noticed at the cemetery that he only had a bowler." She paused. "I thought then how very much he'd appreciate a top hat. We ought to give him a present too. He was always very nice to Father." "But," cried Josephine, flouncing on her pillow and staring across the dark at Constantia, Father's head! And suddenly, for one awful moment, she nearly giggled. Not, of course, that she felt in the least like giggling. It must have been a habit. Years ago, when they had stayed awake at night talking, their beds had simply heaved. And now the porter's head, disappearing, popped out like a candle under Father's hat. The giggle mounted. She clenched her hands, she fought it down, she frowned fiercely at the dark and said, Remember, terribly sternly. We can decide tomorrow, she said. Constantia had noticed nothing. She sighed. Do you think we ought to have our dressing gowns dyed as well? Black? Almost shrieked Josephine. Well, what else? Said Constantia. I was thinking, it doesn't seem quite sincere in a way to wear black out of doors and when we're fully dressed, and then when we're at home. But nobody sees us, said Josephine. She gave the bedclothes such a twitch that both her feet became uncovered and she had to creep up the pillows to get them well under again. Kate does, said Constantia, and the postman very well might. Josephine thought of her dark red slippers, which matched her dressing gown, and of Constantia's favourite indefinite green ones, which went with hers. Black! 2 black dressing gowns and 2 pairs of black woolly slippers, creeping off to the bathroom like black cats. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, said she. Silence. Then Constantia said, We shall have to post the papers with the notice in them tomorrow to catch the Ceylon mail. How many letters have we had up till now? 23. Josephine had replied to them all, and 23 times when she came to, We miss our dear father so much, she had broken down and had to use her handkerchief, on some of them even to soak up a very light blue tear with an edge of blotting paper. Strange. She couldn't have put it on, but 23 times. Even now, though, when she said over to herself sadly, We miss our dear father so much, she could have cried if she'd wanted to. Have you got enough stamps? Came from Constantia. Oh, how can I tell? Said Josephine crossly. What's the good of asking me that now? I was just wondering, said Constantia mildly. Silence again. There came a little rustle, a scurry, a hop. A mouse, said Constantia. It can't be a mouse because there aren't any crumbs, said Josephine. But it doesn't know there aren't, said Constantia. A spasm of pity squeezed her heart. Poor little thing. She wished she'd left a tiny piece of biscuit on the dressing table. It was awful to think of it not finding anything. What would it do? I can't think how they managed to live at all, she said slowly. Who? Demanded Josephine. And Constantia said more loudly than she meant to, Mice. Josephine was furious. Oh, what nonsense, Con, she said. What have mice got to do with it? You're asleep. I don't think I am, said Constantia. She shut her eyes to make sure. She was. Josephine arched her spine, pulled up her knees, folded her arms so that her fists came under her ears, and pressed her cheek hard against the pillow. Chapter 2. Another thing which complicated matters was they had Nurse Andrews staying on with them that week. It was their own fault. They had asked her. It was Josephine's idea. On the last morning when the doctor had gone, Josephine had said to Constantia, Don't you think it would be rather nice if we asked Nurse Andrews to stay on for a week as our guest? Very nice, said Constantia. I thought, went on Josephine quickly, I should just say this afternoon after I've paid her, my sister and I would be very pleased after all you've done for us, Nurse Andrews, if you would stay on for a week as our guest. I'd have to put that in about being our guest in case... Oh, but she could hardly expect to be paid, cried Constantia. One never knows, said Josephine sagely. Nurse Andrews had, of course, jumped at the idea, but it was a bother. It meant they had to have regular sit-down meals at the proper times, whereas if they'd been alone they could have just asked Kate if she wouldn't have minded bringing them a tray wherever they were. And mealtimes now that the strain was over were rather a trial. Nurse Andrews was simply fearful about butter. Really, they couldn't help feeling that about butter, at least, she took advantage of their kindness. And she had that maddening habit of asking for just an inch more bread to finish what she had on her plate, and then, at the last mouthful, absent-mindedly, of course it wasn't absent-mindedly, taking another helping. Josephine got very red when this happened, and she fastened her small, bead-like eyes on the tablecloth as if she saw a minute, strange insect creeping through the web of it. But Constantia's long, pale face lengthened and set, and she gazed away, far over the desert to where that line of camels unwound like a thread of wool. "When I was with Lady Tukes," said Nurse Andrews, "she had such a dainty little contrivance for the butter. It was a silver cupid balanced on the border of a glass dish, holding a tiny fork. And when you wanted some butter, you simply pressed his foot, and he bent down and speared you a piece. It was quite a game." Josephine could hardly bear that. "But I think those things are very extravagant," was all she said. "But why?" asked Nurse Andrews, beaming through her eyeglasses. "No one surely would take more butter than one wanted, would one?" "Ring, Con," cried Josephine. She couldn't trust herself to reply. And proud young Kate, the enchanted princess, came in to see what the old tabbies wanted now. She snatched away their plates of mock something or other and slapped down a white, terrified blancmange. "Jam, please, Kate," said Josephine kindly. Kate knelt and burst open the sideboard, lifted the lid of the jam pot, saw it was empty, put it on the table, and stalked off. "I'm afraid," said Nurse Andrews a moment later, "there isn't any." "Oh, what a bother," said Josephine. She bit her lip. "What had we better do?" Constantia looked dubious. "We can't disturb Kate again," she said softly. Nurse Andrews waited, smiling at them both. Her eyes wandered, spying at everything behind her eyeglasses. Constantia, in despair, went back to her camels. Josephine frowned heavily, concentrated. If it hadn't been for this idiotic woman, she and Con would, of course, have eaten their blancmange without. Suddenly the idea came. "I know," she said. "Marmalade. There's some marmalade in the sideboard. Get it, Con." "I hope," laughed Nurse Andrews, and her laugh was like a spoon tinkling against a medicine glass. "I hope it's not very bitter marmalade." 3. But, after all, it was not long now, and then she'd be gone for good. And there was no getting over the fact that she had been very kind to Father. She had nursed him day and night at the end. Indeed, both Constantia and Josephine felt privately that she had rather overdone than not leaving him at the very last. For when they had gone in to say goodbye, Nurse Andrews had sat beside his bed the whole time, holding his wrist and pretending to look at her watch. It shouldn't have been necessary. It couldn't have been necessary. It was so tactless, too. Supposing Father had wanted to say something private to them. Not that he had. Oh, far from it. He lay there, purple, a dark, angry purple in the face, and never even looked at them when they came in. Then, as they were standing there wondering what to do, he had suddenly opened one eye. Oh, what a difference it would have made! What a difference to their memory of him! How much easier to tell people about it if he had only opened both. But no, one eye only. It glared at them a moment, and then went out. 4. It had made it very awkward for them when Mr. Farrolls of St. John's called the same afternoon. "The end was quite peaceful, I trust?" were the first words he said as he glided towards them through the dark drawing-room. "Quite," said Josephine faintly. They both hung their heads. Both of them felt certain that eye wasn't at all a peaceful eye. "Won't you sit down?" said Josephine. "Thank you, Miss Pinner," said Mr. Farroll gratefully. He folded his coat-tails and began to lower himself into father's armchair, but just as he touched it he almost sprang up and slid into the next chair instead. He coughed. Josephine clasped her hands. Constantia looked vague. "I want you to feel, Miss Pinner," said Mr. Farroll, "and to you, Miss Constantia, that I'm trying to be helpful. I want to be helpful to you both, if you will let me. These are the times," said Mr. Farroll, very simply and earnestly, "when God means us to be helpful to one another." "Thank you very much, Mr. Farroll," said Josephine and Constantia. "Not at all," said Mr. Farroll gently. He drew his kid gloves through his fingers and leaned forward. "And if either of you would like a little communion, either or both of you, here and now, you have only to tell me. A little communion is often a great comfort," he added tenderly. But the idea of a little communion terrified them. What? In the drawing-room by themselves, with no altar or anything? The piano would be much too high, thought Constantia, and Mr. Farroll could not possibly lean over it with the chalice. And Kate would be sure to come bursting in and interrupt them, thought Josephine. And supposing the bell rang in the middle, it might be somebody important, about their mourning. Would they get up reverently and go out, or would they have to wait, in torture? "Perhaps you will send round a note by your good Kate, if you would care for it later," said Mr. Farroll. "Oh, yes, thank you very much," they both said. Mr. Farroll got up and took his black straw hat from the round table. "And about the funeral," he said softly, "I may arrange that, as your dear father's old friend, and yours, Miss Pinner and Miss Constantia?" Josephine and Constantia got up too. "I should like it to be quite simple," said Josephine firmly, "and not too expensive. At the same time I should like a good one that will last," thought dreamy Constantia, as if Josephine were buying a nightgown. But, of course, Josephine didn't say that. "One suitable to our father's position." She was very nervous. "I'll run round to our good friend Mr. Knight," said Mr. Farroll soothingly. "I will ask him to come and see you. I am sure you will find him very helpful indeed." 5. Well, at any rate, all that part of it was over, though neither of them could possibly believe that father was never coming back. Josephine had had a moment of absolute terror at the cemetery while the coffin was lowered, to think that she and Constantia had done this thing without asking his permission. What would father say when he found out? For he was bound to find out sooner or later. He always did. "Buried? You two girls had me buried?" She heard his stick thumping. Oh, what would they say? What possible excuse could they make? It sounded such an appallingly heartless thing to do. Such a wicked advantage to take of a person because he happened to be helpless at the moment. The other people seemed to treat it all as a matter of course. They were strangers. They couldn't be expected to understand that father was the very last person for such a thing to happen to. No, the entire blame for it all would fall on her and Constantia. And the expense, she thought, stepping into the tight-buttoned cab. When she had to show him the bills, what would he say then? She heard him absolutely roaring. "And do you expect me to pay for this gimcrack excursion of yours?" "Oh," groaned poor Josephine aloud, "we shouldn't have done it, Con." And Constantia, pale as a lemon in all that blackness, said in a frightened whisper, "Done what, Jug?" "Let them bury father like that," said Josephine, breaking down and crying into her new, queer-smelling mourning handkerchief. "But what else could we have done?" asked Constantia wonderingly. "We couldn't have kept him, Jug. We couldn't have kept him unburied. At any rate, not in a flat that size." Josephine blew her nose. The cab was dreadfully stuffy. "I don't know," she said forlornly. "It is all so dreadful. I feel we ought to have tried to, just for a time at least, to make perfectly sure. One thing's certain," and her tears sprang out again. "Father will never forgive us for this. Never." 6. Father would never forgive them. That was what they felt more than ever when, 2 mornings later, they went into his room to go through his things. They had discussed it quite calmly. It was even down on Josephine's list of things to be done. Go through Father's things and settle about them. But that was a very different matter from saying after breakfast, "Well, are you ready, Con?" "Yes, Jug, when you are." "Then I think we'd better get it over." It was dark in the hall. It had been a rule for years never to disturb Father in the morning, whatever happened, and now they were going to open the door without knocking even. Constantia's eyes were enormous at the idea. Josephine felt weak at the knees. You go first," she gasped, pushing Constantia. But Constantia said, as she always had said on those occasions, "No, Jug, that's not fair. You're eldest." Josephine was just going to say what at other times she wouldn't have owned to for the world. Excuse me. Oh. What she kept for her very last weapon, "but you're tallest," when they noticed that the kitchen door was open, and there stood Kate. "Very stiff," said Josephine, grasping the door handle and doing her best to turn it, as if anything ever deceived Kate. It couldn't be helped. That girl was... Then the door was shut behind them, but they weren't in Father's room at all. They might have suddenly walked through the wall by mistake into a different flat altogether. Was the door just behind them? They were too frightened to look. Josephine knew that if it was holding itself tight shut. Constantia felt that, like the doors in dreams, it hadn't any handle at all. It was the coldness which made it so awful. Or the whiteness. Which? Everything was covered. The blinds were down. A cloth hung over the mirror. A sheet hid the bed. A huge fan of white paper filled the fireplace. Constantia timidly put out her hand. She almost expected a snowflake to fall. Josephine felt a queer tingling in her nose, as if her nose was freezing. Then a cab clop-clopped over the cobbles below, and the quiet seemed to shake into little pieces. "I had better pull up a blind," said Josephine bravely. "Yes, it might be a good idea," whispered Constantia. They only gave the blind a touch, but it flew up and the cord flew after, rolling round the blind stick, and the little tassel tapped as if trying to get free. That was too much for Constantia. Don't you think we might put it off for another day?" she whispered. Why? Snapped Josephine, feeling, as usual, much better now that she knew for certain that Constantia was terrified. It's got to be done. But I do wish you wouldn't whisper, Con. I didn't know I was whispering, whispered Constantia. And why do you keep staring at the bed? Said Josephine, raising her voice almost defiantly. There's nothing on the bed. Oh, Jug, don't say so, said poor Connie. At any rate, not so loudly. Josephine felt herself that she had gone too far. She took a wide swerve over to the chest of drawers, put out her hand, but quickly drew it back again. Connie, she gasped, and she wheeled round and leaned with her back against the chest of drawers. Oh, Jug, what? Josephine could only glare. She had the most extraordinary feeling that she had just escaped something simply awful. But how could she explain to Constantia that Father was in the chest of drawers? He was in the top drawer with his handkerchiefs and neckties, or in the next with his shirts and pyjamas, or in the lowest of all with his suits. He was watching there, hidden away, just behind the door handle, ready to spring. She pulled a funny old-fashioned face at Constantia, just as she used to in the old days when she was going to cry. I can't open, she nearly wailed. No, don't, Jug, whispered Constantia earnestly. It's much better not to. Don't let's open anything. At any rate, not for a long time. But it seems so weak, said Josephine, breaking down. But why not be weak for once, Jug? Argued Constantia, whispering quite fiercely, if it is weak. And her pale stare flew from the locked writing table, so safe, to the huge glittering wardrobe, and she began to breathe in a queer panting way. Why shouldn't we be weak for once in our lives, Jug? It's quite excusable. Let's be weak. Be weak, Jug. It's much nicer to be weak than to be strong. And then she did one of those amazingly bold things that she'd done about twice before in their lives. She marched over to the wardrobe, turned the key, and took it out of the lock. Took it out of the lock and held it up to Josephine, showing Josephine by her extraordinary smile that she knew what she'd done. She'd risked deliberately Father being in there among his overcoats. If the huge wardrobe had lurched forward, had crashed down on Constantia, Josephine wouldn't have been surprised. On the contrary, she would have thought it the only suitable thing to happen. But nothing happened. Only the room seemed quieter than ever, and bigger flakes of cold air fell on Josephine's shoulders and knees. She began to shiver. Come, Jug, said Constantia, still with that awful callous smile, and Josephine followed just as she had that last time, when Constantia had pushed Benny into the round pond. 7. But the strain told on them when they were back in the dining room. They sat down very shaky and looked at each other. I don't feel I can settle to anything, said Josephine, until I've had something. Do you think we could ask Kate for 2 cups of hot water? I really don't see why we shouldn't, said Constantia carefully. Excuse me. She was quite normal again. I won't ring. I'll go to the kitchen door and ask her. Yes, do, said Josephine, sinking down into a chair. Tell her just 2 cups, Con, nothing else, on a tray. She needn't even put the jug on, need she? Said Constantia, as though Kate might very well complain if the jug had been there. Oh, certainly not. The jug's not at all necessary. She can pour it direct out of the kettle, cried Josephine, feeling that would be a labour-saving indeed. Their cold lips quivered at the greenish brims. Josephine curved her small red hands round the cup, Constantia sat up and blew on the wavy steam, making it flutter from one side to the other. "Speaking of Benny," said Josephine. And though Benny hadn't been mentioned, Constantia immediately looked as though he had. "He'll expect us to send him something of father's, of course, but it's so difficult to know what to send to Ceylon." "You mean things get unstuck so on the voyage?" murmured Constantia. "No, lost," said Josephine sharply. "You know there's no post, only runners." Both paused to watch a black man in white linen drawers running through the pale fields for dear life, with a large brown paper parcel in his hands. The man was tiny. He scurried along glistening like an ant. But there was something blind and tireless about Constantia's tall, thin fellow, which made him, she decided, a very unpleasant person indeed. On the veranda, dressed all in white and wearing a cork helmet, stood Benny. His right hand shook up and down, as father's did when he was impatient. And behind him, not in the least interested, sat Hilda, the unknown sister-in-law. She swung in a cane rocker and flicked over the leaves of the Tatler. "I think his watch would be the most suitable present," said Josephine. Constantia looked up. She seemed surprised. "Oh, would you trust a gold watch to him?" "But of course I'd disguise it," said Josephine. No one would know it was a watch." She liked the idea of having to make a parcel such a curious shape that no one could possibly guess what it was. She even thought for a moment of hiding the watch in a narrow cardboard corset box that she'd kept by her for a long time, waiting for it to come in for something. It was such beautiful, firm cardboard. But no, it wouldn't be appropriate for this occasion. It had lettering on it. Medium woman's 28. Extra firm busks. It would be almost too much of a surprise for Benny to open that and find father's watch inside. "And, of course, it isn't as though it would be going. Ticking, I mean," said Constantia, who was still thinking of the native love of jewellery. "At least," she added, "it would be very strange if after all that time it was." 8. Josephine made no reply. She had flown off on one of her tangents. She had suddenly thought of Cyril. Wasn't it more usual for the only grandson to have the watch? And then dear Cyril was so appreciative, and a gold watch meant so much to a young man. Benny, in all probability, had quite got out of the habit of watches. Men so seldom wore waistcoats in those hot climates. Whereas Cyril in London wore them from year's end to year's end. And it would be so nice for her and Constantia, when he came to tea, to know it was there. "I see you've got on grandfather's watch, Cyril." It would be somehow so satisfactory. Dear boy, what a blow his sweet, sympathetic little note had been. Of course they quite understood, but it was most unfortunate. "It would have been such a point having him," said Josephine. "And he would have enjoyed it so," said Constantia, not thinking what she was saying. However, as soon as he got back he was coming to tea with his aunties. Cyril to tea was one of their rare treats. "Now, Cyril, you mustn't be frightened of our cakes. Your Auntie Con and I bought them at Buzzards this morning. We know what a man's appetite is, so don't be ashamed of making a good tea." Josephine cut recklessly into the rich dark cake that stood for her winter gloves or the soling and heeling of Constantia's only respectable shoes. But Cyril was most unmanlike in appetite. "I say, Aunt Josephine, I simply can't. I've only just had lunch, you know." "Oh, Cyril, that can't be true. It's after 4, cried Josephine. Constantia sat with her knife poised over the chocolate roll. "It is, all the same," said Cyril. "I had to meet a man at Victoria, and he kept me hanging about till there was only time to get lunch and to come on here. And he gave me, Cyril put his hand to his forehead. "A terrific blowout," he said. It was disappointing, today of all days. But still he couldn't be expected to know. "But you'll have a meringue, won't you, Cyril?" said Aunt Josephine. "These meringues were bought specially for you. Your dear father was so fond of them. We were sure you are, too." "I am, Aunt Josephine," cried Cyril ardently. "Do you mind if I take half to begin with?" "Not at all, dear boy. But we mustn't let you off with that." "Is your dear father still so fond of meringues?" asked Auntie Con gently. She winced faintly as she broke through the shell of hers. "Well, I don't quite know, Auntie Con," said Cyril breezily. At that they both looked up. "Don't know?" almost snapped Josephine. "Don't know a thing like that about your own father, Cyril?" "Surely," said Auntie Con softly. Cyril tried to laugh it off. "Oh, well," he said, "it's such a long time since—" He faltered. He stopped. Their faces were too much for him. "Even so," said Josephine. And Auntie Con looked. Cyril put down his teacup. "Wait a bit," he cried. "Wait a bit, Aunt Josephine. What am I thinking of?" He looked up. They were beginning to brighten. Cyril slapped his knee. "Of course," he said. "It was meringues. Oh, how could I have forgotten? Yes, Aunt Josephine, you're perfectly right. Father's most frightfully keen on meringues." They didn't only beam. Aunt Josephine went scarlet with pleasure. Auntie Con gave a deep, deep sigh. "And now, Cyril, you must come and see Father," said Josephine. "He knows you were coming today." "Right," said Cyril, very firmly and heartily. He got up from his chair. Suddenly he glanced at the clock. I say, Auntie Con, isn't your clock a bit slow? I've got to meet a man at Paddington just after 5. I'm afraid I shan't be able to stay very long with Grandfather." "Oh, he won't expect you to stay very long," said Aunt Josephine. Constantia was still gazing at the clock. She couldn't make up her mind if it was fast or slow. It was one or the other. She felt almost certain of that. At any rate, it had been. Cyril still lingered. "Aren't you coming along, Auntie Con?" "Of course," said Josephine. "We shall all go. Come on, Con." 9. They knocked at the door, and Cyril followed his aunts into Grandfather's hot, sweetish room. "Come on," said Grandfather Pinner. "Don't hang about. What is it? What have you been up to?" He was sitting in front of a roaring fire, clasping his stick. He had a thick rug over his knees. On his lap there lay a beautiful pale yellow silk handkerchief. "It's Cyril, Father," said Josephine shyly, and she took Cyril's hand and led him forward. "Good afternoon, Grandfather," said Cyril, trying to take his hand out of Aunt Josephine's. Grandfather Pinner shot his eyes at Cyril in the way he was famous for. Where was Auntie Con? She stood on the other side of Aunt Josephine. Her long arms hung down in front of her. Her hands were clasped. She never took her eyes off Grandfather. "Well?" said Grandfather Pinner, beginning to thump. "What have you got to tell me?" What had he? What had he got to tell him? Cyril felt himself smiling like a perfect imbecile. The room was stifling, too. But Aunt Josephine came to his rescue. She cried brightly, "Cyril says his father is still very fond of meringues, Father dear." "Eh?" said Grandfather Pinner, curving his hand like a purple meringue shell over one ear. Josephine repeated, "Cyril says his father is still very fond of meringues." "Can't hear," said old Colonel Pinner. And he waved Josephine away with his stick, and then pointed with his stick to Cyril. "Tell me what she's trying to say," he said. "My God. Must I?" said Cyril, blushing and staring at Aunt Josephine. Do, dear, she smiled. It will please him so much.
Come on, out with it,
cried Colonel Pinner testily, beginning to thump again. And Cyril leaned forward and yelled, "Father's still very fond of meringues." At that, Grandfather Pinner jumped as though he had been shot.
Don't shout, he cried. What's the matter with the boy? Meringues? What about 'em?
Oh, Aunt Josephine, must we go on? Groaned Cyril desperately. It's quite all right, dear boy, said Aunt Josephine, as though he and she were at the dentist's together. He'll understand in a minute. And then she whispered to Cyril, He's getting a bit deaf, you know. Then she leaned forward and really bawled at Grandfather Pinner. Cyril only wanted to tell you, father dear, that his father is still very fond of meringues. Colonel Pinner heard that time, heard and brooded, looking Cyril up and down.
What an extraordinary thing, said old Grandfather Pinner. What an extraordinary thing to come all this way here to tell me.
And Cyril felt it was. Yes, I shall send Cyril the watch, said Josephine. That would be very nice, said Constantia. I seem to remember last time he came there was some little trouble about the time. 10. They were interrupted by Kate bursting through the door in her usual fashion, as though she had discovered some secret panel in the wall. Fried or boiled? Asked the bold voice. Fried or boiled? Josephine and Constantia were quite bewildered for the moment. They could hardly take it in. Fried or boiled what, Kate? Asked Josephine, trying to begin to concentrate. Kate gave a loud sniff. Fish. Well, why didn't you say so immediately? Josephine reproached her gently. How could you expect us to understand, Kate? There are a great many things in this world, you know, which are fried or boiled. And after such a display of courage, she said quite brightly to Constantia, Which do you prefer, Con? I think it might be nice to have it fried, said Constantia. On the other hand, of course, boiled fish is very nice. I think I prefer both equally well. Unless you... In that case... I shall fry it, said Kate, and she bounced back, leaving their door open and slamming the door of her kitchen. Josephine gazed at Constantia. She raised her pale eyebrows until they rippled away into her pale hair. She got up. She said, in a very lofty, imposing way, Do you mind following me into the drawing-room, Constantia? I've something of great importance to discuss with you. For it was always to the drawing-room they retired when they wanted to talk over Kate. Josephine closed the door meaningly. Sit down, Constantia, she said, still very grand. She might have been receiving Constantia for the first time. And Con looked round vaguely for a chair, as though she felt indeed quite a stranger. Now the question is, said Josephine, bending forward, whether we shall keep her or not. That is the question, agreed Constantia. And this time, said Josephine firmly, we must come to a definite decision. Constantia looked for a moment as though she might begin going over all the other times, but she pulled herself together and said, Yes, Jug. You see, Con, explained Josephine, everything is so changed now. Constantia looked up quickly. I mean, went on Josephine, we're not dependent on Kate as we were. And she blushed faintly. There's not father to cook for. That is perfectly true, agreed Constantia. Father certainly doesn't want any cooking now, whatever else. Josephine broke in sharply. You're not sleepy, are you, Con? Sleepy, Jug? Constantia was wide-eyed. Well, concentrate more, said Josephine sharply, and she returned to the subject. What it comes to is, if we did, and this she barely breathed, glancing at the door,
give Kate notice.
She raised her voice again. We could manage our own food. Why not? Cried Constantia. She couldn't help smiling. The idea was so exciting. She clasped her hands. What should we live on, Jug? Oh, eggs in various forms, said Jug, lofty again. And besides, there are all the cooked foods. But I've always heard, said Constantia, they are considered so very expensive. Not if one buys them in moderation, said Josephine. But she tore herself away from this fascinating bypath and dragged Constantia after her. What we've got to decide now, however, is whether we really do trust Kate or not. Constantia leaned back. Her flat little laugh flew from her lips. Isn't it curious, Jug, said she, that just on this one subject I've never been able to quite make up my mind? 11. She never had. The whole difficulty was to prove anything. How did one prove things? How could one? Suppose Kate had stood in front of her and deliberately made a face. Mightn't she very well have been in pain? Wasn't it impossible, at any rate, to ask Kate if she was making a face at her? If Kate answered no, and of course she would say no, what a position! How undignified! Then again, Constantia suspected, she was almost certain that Kate went to her chest of drawers when she and Josephine were out, not to take her things but to spy. Many times she had come back to find her amethyst cross in the most unlikely places, under her lace ties or on top of her evening Bertha. More than once she had laid a trap for Kate. She had arranged things in a special order and then called Josephine to witness. You see, Jug? Quite, Con. Now we shall be able to tell. But, oh dear, when she did go to look, she was as far off from a proof as ever. If anything was displaced, it might so very well have happened as she closed the drawer. A jolt might have done it easily. You come, Jug, and decide. I really can't. It's too difficult. But after a pause and a long glare, Josephine would sigh. Now you've put the doubt into my mind, Con, I'm sure I can't tell myself. Well, we can't postpone it again, said Josephine. If we postpone it this time... 12. But at that moment in the street below a barrel organ struck up. Josephine and Constantia sprang to their feet together. Run, Con, said Josephine. Run quickly, there's sixpence on the... Then they remembered. It didn't matter. They would never have to stop the organ grinder again. Never again would she and Constantia be told to make that monkey take his noise somewhere else. Never would sound that loud, strange bellow when father thought they were not hurrying enough. The organ grinder might play there all day and the stick would not thump. It will never thump again, it will never thump again, played the barrel organ. What was Constantia thinking? She had such a strange smile. She looked different. She couldn't be going to cry. Jug, said Constantia softly, pressing her hands together. Do you know what day it is? It's Saturday. It's a week today. A whole week. A week since father died, a week since father died, cried the barrel organ. And Josephine, too, forgot to be practical and sensible. She smiled, faintly, strangely. On the Indian carpet there fell a square of sunlight, pale red. It came and went and came, and stayed, deepened, until it shone almost golden. The sun's out, said Josephine, as though it really mattered. A perfect fountain of bubbling notes shook from the barrel organ, round, bright notes, carelessly scattered. Constantia lifted her big, cold hands as if to catch them, and then her hands fell again. She walked over to the mantelpiece to her favourite Buddha, and the stone and gilt image, whose smile always gave her such a queer feeling, almost a pain, and yet a pleasant pain, seemed today to be more than smiling. He knew something. He had a secret. "I know something that you don't know," said her Buddha. Oh, what was it? What could it be? And yet she had always felt there was something. The sunlight pressed through the windows, thieved its way in, flashed its light over the furniture and the photographs. Josephine watched it. When it came to Mother's photograph, the enlargement over the piano, it lingered as though puzzled to find so little remained of Mother, except the earrings shaped like tiny pagodas and a black feather boa. Why did the photographs of dead people always fade so? Wondered Josephine. As soon as a person was dead, their photograph died too. But, of course, this one of Mother was very old. It was 35 years old. Josephine remembered standing on a chair and pointing out that feather boa to Constantia and telling her that it was a snake that had killed their mother in Ceylon. Would everything have been different if Mother hadn't died? She didn't see why. Aunt Florence had lived with them until they had left school, and they had moved 3 times and had their yearly holiday, and there'd been changes of servants, of course. Some little sparrows, young sparrows they sounded, chirped on the window ledge. Yeep, yeep, yeep. But Josephine felt that they were not sparrows, not on the window ledge. It was inside her, that queer little crying noise. Yeep, yeep, yeep. Ah, what was it crying, so weak and forlorn? If Mother had lived, might they have married? But there had been nobody for them to marry. There had been Father's Anglo-Indian friends before he quarrelled with them. But after that she and Constantia never met a single man except clergymen. How did one meet men? Or even if they'd met them, how could they have got to know men well enough to be more than strangers? One read of people having adventures, being followed, and so on. But nobody had ever followed Constantia and her. Oh yes, there had been one year at Eastbourne a mysterious man at their boarding house who had put a note on the jug of hot water outside their bedroom door. But by the time Connie had found it, the steam had made the writing too faint to read. They couldn't even make out to which of them it was addressed. And he had left next day. And that was all. The rest had been looking after Father, and at the same time keeping out of Father's way. But now? But now? The thieving sun touched Josephine gently. She lifted her face. She was drawn over to the window by gentle beams. Until the barrel organ stopped playing, Constantia stayed before the Buddha, wondering, but not as usual, not vaguely. This time her wonder was like longing. She remembered the times she had come in here, crept out of bed in her nightgown when the moon was full, and lain on the floor with her arms outstretched, as though she was crucified. Why? The big pale moon had made her do it. The horrible dancing figures on the carved screen had leered at her, and she hadn't minded. She remembered, too, how, whenever they were at the seaside, she had gone off by herself and got as close to the sea as she could, and sung something she had made up, while she gazed all over that restless water. There had been this other life, running out, bringing things home in bags, getting things on approval, discussing them with Jug, and taking them back to get more things on approval, and arranging Father's trays and trying not to annoy Father. But it all seemed to have happened in a kind of tunnel. It wasn't real. It was only when she came out of the tunnel into the moonlight, or by the sea, or into a thunderstorm, that she really felt herself. What did it mean? What was it she was always wanting? What did it all lead to? Now? Now? She turned away from the Buddha with one of her vague gestures. She went over to where Josephine was standing. She wanted to say something to Josephine, something frightfully important about the future and what... "Don't you think perhaps..." she began. But Josephine interrupted her. "I was wondering if now..." she murmured. They stopped. They waited for each other. "Go on, Con," said Josephine. No, Jug, after you," said Constantia. "No, say what you were going to say. You began," said Josephine. I'd rather hear what you were going to say first," said Constantia. "Don't be absurd, Con." "Really, Jug." "Connie!" "Oh, Jug!" A pause. Then Constantia said faintly, "I can't say what I was going to say, Jug, because I've forgotten what it was that I was going to say." Josephine was silent for a moment. She stared at a big cloud where the sun had been. Then she replied shortly, "I've forgotten too." The end. Thank you for listening. I hope you all enjoyed that one. I feel like that's a very a lot of laugh track freeze frame. Wow, Andy. Again, I feel like that's another one that's very, very relatable for a lot of people. It's that kind of weird... Couldn't resist now, that's fine, that was good. It was good. But, yeah, like... For me as well, like that story, there are a lot of things in that story that I'm like, this is very similar to aspects of my family and like situations like with dealing with grief and stuff, and it's again she just writes very real stuff in there. I know it's she writes stuff that is, I suppose it's just life events that pretty much everybody goes through. But she's just managed to capture the mood and the difficulties and the sort of desperation for closeness, and it's just, she just does it very, very well. You found that story difficult to follow, then? Yes, I know. It was kind of annoying how it, they were jumping from one thing to another. She does that occasionally. And there were sort of like, there were sections that were obviously sort of in the past and then in the future. So it was, and then in the present rather. And time was kind of going a bit wonky. But I think that's the idea, because again, when like in that kind of situation, grief has a habit of, and mourning has a habit of swallowing time up in weird ways. So I think that was probably the idea behind it. But yes, I agree, it was a little bit difficult to follow. When I read it through, I had to sort of read a couple of bits a couple of times. But I hope you got the gist at least. The vibes were there. But yes. I hope you enjoyed. Not a particularly happy stream. But I don't know. It feels like it's important to read the sad stories and the uncomfortable stories too. And I think we can read ghost stories, and we can read sort of fun stories and short stories and that are a bit more sort of actiony and stuff like that. But I think these kinds of stories are very important because they're important to talk about and they're important to feel those feels. And I think Mansfield just does an absolutely incredible job of writing them. So yeah. But yes, I will see who we can raid over to. I assume Stephen's probably live. Yes, he is. So I will throw you all over to Stephen. But thank you all very much indeed for being here. Everybody is always very welcome. You're all wonderful. And in theory, we'll be back on Saturday for Sam to start a novel of some description. Probably kidnapped, we're not sure. But thank you all very, very much for being here. Go take care of yourselves and others, and we shall see you again soon. Goodbye.